In the heart of the sprawling Serengeti Wildlife Sanctuary, where the golden sun kissed the tall grasses and the calls of wild creatures echoed through the air, a small lion cub named Kovu was born. He was the youngest of 3 siblings, the tiniest and quietest, but his eyes, 2 wide amber gems, held a depth that no one could quite explain. His mother, a powerful lioness named Nala, was fiercely protective. From the moment Kovu opened his eyes, she kept him close, sheltering him beneath her body and growling softly if anyone came too near. To the zookeepers who managed the sanctuary, it was both endearing and concerning. Unlike the other cubs who played, stumbled, and roared, Kovu was different. He didn't run or tumble with his siblings. He just stared, especially at his mother. It wasn't a normal kind of stare. It was long, fixed, almost as if he were trying to understand something that no one else could see. At first, the staff brushed it off. Cubs were curious by nature, and perhaps this one was simply more observant than the rest. But as days turned into weeks, the stares became more unsettling. Every morning when the zookeeper, Daniel, came to feed the lions, he would find Kovu sitting a few feet away from Nala, eyes locked on her face. He wouldn't move until she did. Even when Nala tried to nudge him to play or eat, he would just keep watching, unblinking. Daniel, who had worked at the sanctuary for 12 years and had seen countless animals come and go, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the savannah in shades of fire, Daniel noticed something new. Nala seemed weaker. Her breathing was heavier than usual, and when she stood, there was a slight tremor in her legs. Kovu, as always, sat watching her. But this time, there was something else in his gaze, something almost human. Concern. Fear. Daniel leaned against the enclosure fence, his brow furrowed. "You okay, girl?" he whispered, knowing she couldn't answer but speaking anyway. Nala lifted her head, gave a low rumble, and slowly lay down beside her cub. Kovu nuzzled her gently and then looked up again at Daniel, as if trying to tell him something. It sent a shiver down his spine. By the next morning, Nala refused to eat. Her eyes were dull, her breath shallow. Daniel rushed to call the sanctuary vet, Drive. Elise Morgan, a calm and brilliant woman who had saved more animals than anyone could count. When she arrived, Kovu was still sitting by Nala's head, staring at her with the same intensity. Elise crouched near the lioness, her practiced hands checking pulse and breathing. She frowned. "She's dehydrated," she said softly. "Could be infection or internal illness." As she prepared a sedative to perform a full exam, Kovu suddenly let out a soft, mournful sound, a sound so strange that everyone nearby froze. It wasn't a growl or a cry, it was like a whimper of warning. He backed away only when Nala gave a small nudge, as if assuring him it was okay. Over the next hour, Elise and her team worked carefully. They found traces of infection near Nala's abdomen, a wound that had healed on the surface but had festered inside. They treated her, administered fluids, and set up a temporary quarantine area. Kovu stayed close, lying by the fence, his gaze never leaving his mother. Even when the sun fell and the other lions slept, he stayed awake, eyes glinting in the moonlight. Daniel began visiting every few hours, worried about both mother and cub. Days passed, and though Nala began to improve slowly, Kovu's behavior didn't change. If anything, it became even more intense. He followed every movement of his mother, his ears twitching, his head tilting slightly, as though he were listening to something unseen. Daniel began to notice that Kovu reacted before Nala showed any symptoms. Whenever her breathing became labored, Kovu would whine softly hours before. Whenever she was about to have pain, he'd start pacing restlessly. It was almost as if he could sense her condition before anyone else. One morning, as Daniel stood near the enclosure, he noticed Kovu behaving unusually again. The cub was pacing fast, tail flicking, eyes darting between Nala and the zookeeper. "Something's wrong," Daniel muttered under his breath and called Elise immediately. When she arrived, she found Nala lying still, her sides rising unevenly. Elise rushed to check her and realized she was having difficulty breathing due to fluid buildup. "He knew," Daniel whispered in disbelief, watching Kovu whimper and paw the ground. "He knew before we did." Elise glanced at the cub, astonished. "Animals can sense things we can't," she said. "But this one, he's special." They managed to stabilize Nala again, and for a while, things seemed to settle. But Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Kovu's behavior. He started keeping a detailed log, noting every reaction the cub had. It was uncanny. Every time something changed in Nala's health, Kovu would respond hours earlier. It was like he shared an invisible bond with her, one deeper than biology, something beyond science. Weeks later, when Nala was strong enough to rejoin the pride, Daniel decided to observe them from a distance. The other cubs ran and played, but Kovu remained close to his mother, protective and watchful. He'd nuzzle her face gently when she tried to rest, as though checking her breathing. It touched Daniel deeply, but the peace didn't last. One night, during a routine patrol, Daniel noticed the lions were restless. The air felt thick, and even the crickets had gone silent. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed near the outer fence, a fallen tree, likely from a storm. The noise startled the lions, and Nala instinctively moved to shield her cubs. In the confusion, she stumbled and fell. Kovu let out a shrill cry, running to her side. Daniel rushed over and found Nala breathing heavily again. They called Elise immediately. Under the flashlight beam, she examined Nala and found her condition had relapsed. Infection had returned. She needed surgery, or she wouldn't survive the night. Daniel's heart sank as they sedated her. Kovu cried out again, pacing outside the gate, clawing the ground helplessly. Daniel crouched near the fence. "We'll save her, little one," he whispered. The surgery was tense and long. Elise worked tirelessly, her hands steady as she drained fluid and cleaned the internal wound. Outside the medical tent, Kovu waited the entire time. He didn't move, didn't eat. Hours later, as dawn began to rise, Elise finally stepped out, exhausted but relieved. "She's stable," she told Daniel with a tired smile. "She's going to make it." Daniel exhaled in relief. When they brought Nala back to her enclosure, Kovu immediately ran to her, pressing his head against her paw. For the first time, he looked away from her and up at Daniel, as if saying thank you. Daniel's eyes welled with emotion. "You're welcome, little one," he murmured. As weeks turned into months, Nala fully recovered, and the sanctuary became peaceful again. But something about Kovu still intrigued everyone. He had grown stronger, more confident, but his bond with his mother never weakened. Wherever Nala went, Kovu followed. He was her shadow, her guardian. Visitors to the sanctuary would often stop and stare at the pair, sensing something extraordinary between them. It wasn't just love, it was communication, unspoken yet powerful. One afternoon, as Daniel stood near the observation deck, a group of tourists asked him about the pair. "They're inseparable," he explained with a smile. "That cub, he saved her more than once. Sometimes I think he knew what we didn't." The tourists watched in awe as Nala and Kovu lay side by side under the acacia tree, their tails brushing lightly. It was a picture of pure trust and connection. But the story didn't end there. A year later, when Kovu was nearly grown, Daniel noticed him staring again, but this time, not at his mother. He was staring beyond the fence, toward the open plains, where wild lions roamed free. His eyes held the same deep, knowing look as before. It was as if he understood something the humans couldn't. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how Kovu had always seemed to sense danger, illness, and emotion. Maybe, he thought, this wasn't about sickness anymore. Maybe Kovu was feeling something calling him, something in the wild that waited for him. After much discussion, the sanctuary decided to prepare Kovu and Nala for gradual release into a protected reserve. It was risky, but both lions were strong and healthy, and Daniel knew they belonged under the open sky. The day finally came. The gates opened, and for a moment, both lions hesitated. Then Nala stepped forward, her cub close behind. They turned once, looking back at Daniel and Elise. For a brief second, Kovu's gaze met Daniel's, steady, intelligent, and full of something that looked almost like gratitude. Then, with a soft growl, he turned and followed his mother into the wild. Months later, reports came in from the reserve rangers. They had spotted a lioness and her nearly full-grown son patrolling a ridge, healthy and strong. The two were rarely apart. Locals began calling them the Watchers, saying the younger lion could sense approaching danger long before it arrived. Daniel would sometimes look at their photographs, feeling both proud and humbled. Back at the sanctuary, He would often tell their story to visitors, ending it the same way every time. "That cub taught us something," he'd say. "He showed us that love isn't just seen, it's felt, deep, beyond words." He didn't just watch his mother. He understood her, in a way we humans can only dream of. And as the sun set over the golden plains of the Serengeti, somewhere out there, Kovu and Nala roamed together, mother and son, bound forever by a connection stronger than fear, stronger than pain, and deeper than any human could ever truly explain. The cub who once just stared at his mother had become her protector, her voice, and her strength. Their story became a legend of the sanctuary, a reminder that sometimes, when an animal looks at us, or at another, it's not just curiosity. It's understanding. It's love in its purest, most silent form.